Okay, so thank you for what's been a very interactive session so far. What I'm going to do in the next 20 odd minutes is take you on the whirlwind tour of how we do what we just saw, but instead of using native SQL and going against the database, how you could use Atlas in order to do those vocabulary searches instead. So the underpinnings of what you just learned is fundamental, and understanding that, this is going to make a lot more sense. Hopefully this is your primary method for going after vocabulary information in the future, because we've tried to make it such that you don't have to rewrite those queries each time you want to go and do something. So today what we're going to do is I'm going to walk through some examples and have an opportunity for people to ask questions, and then we're going to do some work individually using Atlas, and then ask questions. We'll do a little bit of a working session. We're in compressed time, so I will try not to go too fast. Just to base ourselves, everything that Christian just showed you is what Atlas exposes. All Atlas is doing is giving you another way to get to the information that is in the vocabulary tables within the schema. Okay, so for those who may not know, Atlas is a free, publicly available, web-based, open-source software tool for researchers to conduct scientific analyses on standardized observational data. All right, and one of the features of Atlas is vocabulary, and there are many. For those who walked through the poster session yesterday and saw demonstrations, you would have seen estimation demonstrated through Atlas, cohort definition, negative control selection. There were a lot of things that were demoed yesterday, and Atlas has all of those features, but obviously today we're just going to be talking about the vocabulary. But that's okay, because as you just saw, the vocabulary has a ton of stuff in it, right? So we have concepts and concept relationships and concept ancestors and a whole bunch of other fun stuff. So there's plenty to do just within Atlas on the vocabulary. And to ground what we're going to talk through, I'm highlighting one study which has been used a couple times and referenced yesterday, which is this Graham paper, where what we're looking at is cardiovascular, bleeding, and mortality risks in elderly Medicare patients treated with dabigatran or warfarin for non-valvular atrial fibrillation. Okay, so in this paper, the question becomes, if you're an observational researcher, and you're going to try to replicate this against the CDM, how do you actually find atrial fibrillation, or how do you recreate that cohort that they used in this study? And unfortunately, this highlighted section here in the paper is all they give you in terms of how they identified patients with atrial fibrillation. They say they used the ICD-9 to do that, okay? But they don't give us the ICD-9 codes. They're not in the appendix. So all we know is AFib. And so as you saw, you could go into a query window and then write select star from concept where concept name equals atrial fibrillation. Or if you knew an ICD-9 code, you would know to go and look in the code column, or if you knew something else, you'd have to know which column to look in order to find what it is you're trying to get to. What Atlas does is it kind of takes all that knowledge and says, okay, look, just type in anything, and I'm going to look for it for you in the concept name field, in the concept code field. I'm going to look pretty much anywhere that I might expect to find what you're searching for. So you could just enter a concept name, or an ICD-9 code, or a CPT code, or an NDC code, and Atlas is going to go and try to find it anywhere it can within the vocabulary that's meaningful. You could even insert your 313217 because you knew that was the OMOP identifier for AFib, right? So it will look in the concept ID field, it'll look everywhere. Okay, when you do that search, and I'll walk through Atlas Live in a minute, but when you do that search, the first thing that comes back is this search results screen, all right? And we're going to break down what it is, because there's a lot going on, and it can be a little overwhelming, so I try to break it into these sections. This left side, we have this thing called facets. Think of that as just a way to filter your results. Similar to anyone who's ever shopped on Amazon, if you only want the Amazon Prime products, there's a little checkbox. Or if you only want things from the electronics category, there are checkboxes. That's the same type of thing here. There's a bunch of different facets, and I'll talk a little bit about what they are and how to use them, but they're going to seem very familiar from what you already saw this morning. Across the top, there's another way to filter. So you could search your search results if there's a specific substring you want in it. You're able to do that. We also page the results, right? So if you search for something and there's 2,000 results, you could go through them page at a time. If you click on the column headers, it will sort, right? So you can sort your search results. And then obviously the content below that is the actual results. So something to highlight here, this layout and structure is used in a lot of places across Atlas. So you'll see it in the search results, and then when you actually look at an individual concept, you will also see it in the related concept section, which we'll get into in a few minutes. But rest assured, as you go across Atlas in lots of places, the same structure will apply. So getting familiar with it will help. You'll see it again. All right, so now that we know what the basic layout of the search results screen is, what else can we learn just from seeing the search results? First, in Atlas, the color of the concept name is meaningful. Okay, so we've already seen, your S and your C. Here you actually get that in color. So classifications will show up as purple. Standard concepts will be this blue. Non-standard will be this kind of maroonish red. Right, so just by looking here at the search results for AFib, you could see which ones came back as classifications and which ones were the standards. So as Patrick, as Christian was showing, you're wanting the one with the S. That's going to be your blue one. Okay, so it's very similar. If you want to find that standard concept, look for the one in the display that's blue. And we've talked a lot about this, but just to I guess, beat the dead horse. Why do we care about standard? Because this is what actually shows up in the CDM table. So when you're looking for that patient with AFib, you want to be using that standard concept. Not the ICD-9, ICD-10, READ, SNOMED, ATC, ETC, anything else. You want that standardized concept. One other thing that you could find within Atlas that is informative and helpful is record counts. So in the results, you'll see two columns here that I've highlighted in yellow. One is titled RC and one is titled DRC. So RC stands for record counts. This is not the number of patients. This is the number of records, rows in the database, which are coded using this specific code, okay, with this concept ID. DRC is descendant record counts, and it is the number of records in your underlying CDM database that contain either this concept or any of its descendants, right? So you can see it's a little bit hierarchical. AFib and Flutter seems to be much less represented than AFib in general. You'll also notice that we have non-standard concepts in the search result list, and they have no records, nor will they ever, because the non-standard concepts don't appear in the table. So just reinforcing that idea.
You don't calculate on the fly, I assume. Is that like an Achilles output?
Correct.
To be attached to Atlas?
That's right. What I'll say about this and why I highlight it is because internally within Janssen, when we're working on studies with our clinical teams, I have seen 2 weeks go by where a clinical team is debating whether or not to include one code or another, and is going to hold a panel and meet with some KOLs to try to determine what the right way to classify something is. Here you could just say it's not in the data anyway, it's not going to impact the analysis, and you could do that on the fly. Okay, so what about a case where we have a paper like this one for risk of acute kidney injury associated with the use of fluoroquinolones? What if there are ICD-9 codes? And this happens often for me. I have a clinical partner who said, no, here's my ICD-9 code list. How do I start from there? So you could search for individual ICD-9 codes and try to start finding mappings, or you could use the import feature in Atlas. So within Atlas, in the vocabulary section, you go into import, and you could paste a list of ICD-9 codes, CPT codes, anything. They could be comma separated, space separated, one on each line, it doesn't matter. You paste your codes in, you hit import, and you get your results. Now, something that I try to make sure I point out here is that 584, which is one of those ICD-9 codes, is also a sealed term. It's also a multum term. You want to make sure you review the results of your import, because what you think 584 means may not necessarily be what it means to everyone, right? Christian mentioned these vocabularies and ontologies are all independent, and so there is collision of the different concept codes across them. So while the import feature is helpful and easy to use, make sure that you're going about making sure that you're picking the actual concepts that you want. Something else I want to point out is, remember that when you're searching, that is the first step in doing an exploration around trying to identify the right concepts to use to define your study. If I were to go and search for neoplasm of prostate, I will not find malignant tumor of prostate. Okay? You have to start with a search for a simple string, but that is not where you end. Just because you type diabetes and you get back some diabetes hits doesn't mean you've captured all of them. There are cases where tumor is spelt like this. There are cases where it's not spelt like this. Right? So even just searching for tumor or neoplasm can lead you to omit things that you would otherwise want to include. So start with your search string. From there, look at related concepts, and that lets you make sure that you're including all the right pieces of information in your definitions. Okay, we've gone through search results. Once you're there, you could pick the concept that you want, that you found in that list. In this case, we're looking at AFib. And there are several tabs that come back, right? The first is a concept details tab. This tells you the name, the domain, the class, the vocabulary ID, all the information specific to this concept, all on this one page. The related concepts tab shows you all possible related concepts. So this is mapped concepts, ancestors, descendants, everything. And you'll notice we're using that same layout, so there's facets on the left. You could actually say, okay, they're related, but only show me related standard, or only show me related clinical findings. You could narrow down what you're looking at. There's a number of other facets, including show me only ancestors or descendants. You could there's a distance, which is that same max levels of separation that we saw in the SQL queries. So you could say only show me things 1, 2, or 3 hops away. So all of that shows up on this related concept screen. For cases where we're not sure if we're finding the term that we want, and we want to say, do I want something more broad or more narrow? There is a hierarchy tab. Again, this is taking the same type of query that we used or saw earlier to say, show me the ancestors or show me the descendant, where you'd hold the one concept ID and look up, or hold it and look down. It's doing that on the fly, and it's giving you the information, and it's trying to build you a nice little tree. So you can see at the top are the parents, in the middle is the concept that we're currently selected on, and at the bottom are the children. So you could use this hierarchy tab to navigate up and down within the actual vocabulary and get more broad or more narrow depending on what your needs are. You could also see here that those counts exist again, and that's helpful because you could say, if I go up, I'm going to go from 100,000 to 40 million. That's probably too broad. If I go down, I may end up removing everything, so maybe I need to stay where I am.
These counts, actually, you can do it in SQL, but that's not fast. So to have these counts here right on at the fingertips is extremely useful.
Yep. And as mentioned, so we're not just counting this stuff on the fly. So for those of you who have your data in CDM format, one of the reasons, aside from just doing a data quality assessment, that you want to run all of the Achilles packages is because this is what Atlas uses then. It's grabbing those counts. Okay, so that's my very simple slide presentation of this. I'll take a few questions, and then what we could do is we could actually jump into doing this live. My goal is to make sure that everyone's comfortable with using Atlas to do a vocabulary search after coming through this session. So go ahead, your question?
Good question. Is there a way, like when you have the list of code that you want to export that to a CSV or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's something called concept sets, which I could show briefly towards the end, or if we don't have time, I could show you on the side. But a concept set is your way of shopping for your list of concepts that you want. And then once you have that list, you could export it in a variety of ways. All right.
What about licensing issues for displaying things such as SNOMED, which are not in the public domain?
So what's cool is I don't have to worry about that. It's Christian's problem. Atlas is a web tool that will show you whatever you have in your environment. So if you've gotten the vocabulary and you've downloaded it, whatever version you got, whether it included licensed or didn't include licensed concepts, Atlas will show you that, and that's what it's going to be limited to.
Can you store concept set or code sets?
Can you do what with it?
Can you store?
Yes. So concept sets can be saved in the repository within Odyssey using Atlas. A little bit of slightly more advanced than just vocabulary. So for this actual demo, what I'm going to do is what I encourage you to do, although don't do it right now because then it'll go slower and then we don't have time. But I'm going to start off just by going to the public version of Atlas. So this is running on the internet. You could go to it. It's odyssey.org/web/atlas. It seems like my screen doesn't actually show up right on here. So I'm going to try to shrink this.
So this did not work earlier today. I'm not sure if it works now.
It should work.
It's on the VM.
I know it's on the VM.
But
It's-
it's also online.
So I'm using it right now. So it should be working. I'm not, no smoke and mirrors. This is just me using the live version.
So what browser are you using? So
I'm using Chrome. And you'll want to use Chrome. For lots of reasons. For lots of reasons. Okay.
Sometimes, if it spins and spins and spins, close it and open it up again, and then it works. Don't ask. It's actually a question to Frank.
We're all using it.
Everybody's already there.
Right now.
Okay, so I'm going to do a simple example, and we're just going to do a search for asthma. So again, to get here, I launched Atlas. I clicked vocabulary on the left-hand side. I put in my search string, and now we're looking at our search results. Okay, so the same thing that we just saw in the slide deck, we're going to walk through the example live here. So we have our facets down the left-hand side. Let's say I know that I'm specifically looking for asthma as a condition because there are drugs and observations and procedures that all have the name asthma in it. So I could filter that and I could say, no, I just want the domain condition. And now all of my results have been filtered to that. Let's say I know I only want to look at SNOMED concepts. Those are the standards. So I could click SNOMED and now I'm filtered to that. Right? So that's how our facets work. Let's say I wanted to look for chronic asthma, but I don't want to go back and search again. So I come over here into this filter section and I type chronic. Now I'm only seeing the concepts that have the word chronic as a substring within my concept name. Well, now let's say I want to understand where this is most occurring within my data set. I could sort that by the descendant record count, and I have that. If I want to just take all of these related concepts, this whole listing is important to me, I could hit copy or export to CSV from here and use that for whatever. If I'm building a more complicated list of concepts that I want to use for a study, there's this shopping cart icon, which is a story for another day perhaps to get into what concept sets are. But I could click this and it adds it to my shopping cart, and now it is saved away for me to then go and work with and do other things. I mentioned this earlier, but we have this import tab again. So you could come in here and import a list of concept identifiers, source codes if you have ICD-9s, or a concept set. Let's say you have a colleague at another institution who's built a list of codes using Atlas and they want to share it with you. They could export a concept set and send you that list, and you could then use it in your own environment.
So can you go from asthma, like chronic asthma, back to your source through these source codes, or how would you find where your source is through the vocabulary?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So since I added that asthma code to my concept set, you'll see that there are included concepts and included source codes in concept sets. Again, slightly more advanced than some of the simpler vocabulary stuff. But what I could say is I could click Descendants, and it'll tell me that there are 97 included concepts underneath the concept of asthma, right? So the reason that this is useful, different from what we were just looking at earlier with the queries, when you would say, for this one concept, tell me all of its descendants, right? It may not be the case that you just want that one concept and its descendants. There may be 3 or 4 different concepts that you want to include for a definition of a study. And so you could pick those 3 or 4 and say, I want the descendants of all of them. And then you come in here and you could actually understand, well, what are those descendants? Like, what does this concept set now include? To your question on the specific source codes, this included source codes tab gives you that. So let's say you're saying, okay, I want to do research on asthma, and I believe, Patrick, that this is OMOP OHDSI, it's great. I'm going to use the standard concepts, but I need to be able to communicate that more broadly to a clinical team or in a publication. How do I tell everybody what they want to know, which is ICD-9 until next year? Right? So included source codes gives you that ability. You go to this tab, you can then filter and say, what are the ICD-9? And now you have your ICD-9 code list. So this tells you during the mapping process, when you came from a source system into your CDM, what source codes, what ICD-9 codes were mapped to that got into the database as a condition occurrence of asthma occurring. Yes?
2 quick things. So, number 1, how did you tell whether one of the things that you picked, like asthma, was actually a standard concept code? Did you just assume that was
Because it was blue.
blue?
But you can.
508 compliant.
You can also
PA's gonna fix that for you.
you could also filter. There's it's a good point. There's
Scroll down, right, in that navigation.
there's a bunch of places you could tell actually. So if I go back to my results, and let's actually just click on asthma. So first of all, it's blue here. Second of all, in the filters, you could actually come down here and say, only show me standards. Okay? Then you do have column visibility. We could add that. Oh wait, no, it is there. So you could turn it on. We don't show it by default because we have the colors. But you could turn that column on, and now you see standard is also here. As well, when you finally do go in and get the chance to click on asthma, you could then see on the concept page, which we haven't gotten to quite yet, you could see there the you have the option to go and select all those pieces and see the details and where it was.
And so then the second part is, I would just assume you use the row counts to figure that out and to help make your decision, but it was the colors, got it. So then the second piece is, the source didn't have the row counts. When you check the source values, they didn't have the row counts. Do other people find that useful? I mean, do you ever report that 20% with this and 0% with that? Because it looks like a lot of these columns that you've got have 0 rows.
So you mean back to the source code level? So it's not something that we provide, although if you look up on GitHub, which is the open source repository where we store all the code for Atlas, there actually is a request for that, where people are saying, okay, great, I know everything mapped to asthma and that it is the standard, but I'm curious, what were the codes, what were the ICD-9 codes, for example, that occurred that then mapped to it. So it's something that people have asked for. It's not something that's implemented yet.
I was just trying to find NSAIDs, and I got really lost. So just wondering if you could.
You just wanted to throw a harder example at me? That's basically the idea. So if I'm going to go and do a search for drugs,
Actually say non-steroidal. Because they may have just spelled it out.
Okay. So this is just
Actually,
the wrong way to start.
we are now completely off the demo trail. So anything that goes wrong from here is Siegfried's fault. Okay, so you all know.
There you go.
So I've done my search. Let's get rid of standard concept caption so I can see things again. And so I've gotten some stuff. So there's first gen antihistamine decongestant NSAID. That's probably not what I want.
Well, yeah, find the
If
class.
I did it this way, I should be able to walk up
Okay.
and find a general concept.
That's right. Well, or you just pick the class here right away.
Right. So over here, which class should we pick, Christian?
ATC.
Oh,
Always-
you mean
always start with
the
ATC.
vocabulary?
Yeah, the vocabulary.
But that's not there.
What did you do?
I don't know. What did we do?
I had to wander around before it showed up in the vocabulary list.
Oh, because it probably non-steroidal or NSAID isn't. That's not what they call it there.
Right.
So either we go to do the up thing or say non-steroidal.
So if we limit this to ATC,
Or let's just do ETC for the.
or sorry, ETC, you could say, okay, well, here's an NSAID classification. It's not in what I wanted. Oh, look, and it's red. It's because it's non-standard. Okay. And now I could say, well, what are the related concepts to this guy? And you could start browsing through the hierarchy or through the related concepts. Eventually, do you end up at ATC given what we have had? Apparently.
Yeah, but this is all fifth. Take this and go up.
Well, okay, so we
Take
could
this,
click
go
this
up.
guy, right?
Go up.
And then we could look for.
Go.
Oh, so
Oh, you can't go up, can you?
the ATC hierarchy isn't defined within the thing.
I'm sorry.
What's that?
It's a detail that's not worth getting into right now.
ATC is right now in there for a reason that
We debate
love to
often.
debate.
We debate it
Love to
often.
debate.
It's fine. So what I could see is that if I look here at my filters and my relationships, I could find where things map. I could pick the ingredient, or I could pick the ATC fourth, and this is going to take me up that hierarchy that otherwise isn't on the hierarchy tab for good reason. But now this is getting a larger and larger result set.
Oh, so it's going to start to get really slow because all of its descendants are going to.
So now we're looking at 16,000. If we go up another level, we'll probably look at 100-something thousand. And so depending on how much detail you wanted to get into. But that's how you would navigate through. And in any case where I'm having a hard time finding what it is I'm looking for, step one is search for something that's an approximate. Step two is find the related concepts and then browse to one of the related concepts that gets me to the vocabulary that I want and ultimately to whatever concept I'm looking for. Just in being sensitive to time, we are at time. It is noon. I'm not running away. I'll be here for the rest of the day. For those who'd like to try and play with Atlas and do vocabulary searches, there's two ways for you to do so. One, for those of you who have the virtual machine image working. On your local host, you have a recent build of Atlas available to you along with an installation of the vocabulary. So you could go to that first URL, localhost 8080/Atlas, and you'll be able to browse and use Atlas there. For those who are not successful with a VM, the last link at the bottom is the public version of Atlas that you could get to that has the public version of the vocabulary available behind it. And you would be able to go and work within that environment to do queries as well. Are there any questions I can answer? People are feel free to go eat, especially if you have a class at 1 starting back up. But I'll be here if there are any questions.